Yo, I'm Bob. Into Marvel. Happen to be totally blind since birth. Talking about X-Men, the animated series, Season 4, Episode 1, The Juggernaut Returns. It premiered on May 6th in 1995. It's episode 46 of the show overall, if you're watching the show in chronological order. There are spoilers ahead, so if you haven't watched this decades-old episode by now, you might want to go do that, or you're going to get spoiled. That being said, jumping right in, and you were warned. So, up to this point, we'd only seen Juggernaut in The Unstoppable Juggernaut from Season 1. We saw him in the hair end of Part 2 of the Phoenix Saga. We got a bit more of him in Part 3. And this is his final appearance, barring possibly silent cameos I'm not aware of in the original animated series because there's no audio description to these older episodes. But it's one of my favorite episodes. I remember a promo that Fox Kids would air. I think it was about a week before this episode would premiere. I would see this when it premiered on May 6th, and it was one of my favorites because we get a peek inside the pasts, respectively, of Charles and Kane. We get to see what life was like for these two as kids. But you've also got Eugene Torbit Wiederspan. I think that's how you say his name. And at the beginning of the episode, he's super excited because he's found the cave of Cedric containing the ruby of Cedric, or the gem of Cedric. They call it a ruby and a gem in the episode. So back in Unstoppable Juggernaut, when Colossus is accusing Kane of framing him, he's like, well, how could you do this to a fellow mutant? Juggernaut tells him, he says, I'm not a mutant, tin head. My powers are magical. And I always wondered about that. And in this episode, it was one of my favorites because we got that question answered. I mean, I'm sure there were fans in the 90s who already knew what had happened because they could read the comics, but if you're a blind kid, well, you really don't have much use for comics unless you have someone who could just have a narration marathon for you. I guess if I'd wanted that, I probably could have gotten them recorded, but I mean, folks are busy, you know? Your parents work and they have to come home and, do yard work and all that stuff. I mean, they were probably kind of expensive too. So, I just stuck with the animated series. And, the episode was a very memorable one for me because I got that question answered. I remember wondering, well, how in the heck did you get your powers? Where did they come from? And yeah, we see Eugene finding the ruby of Cedric, and he's got to read from the tablet, and he's got to touch the ruby, and yada yada yada, leave from this place a human Juggernaut. But he's having trouble finding the ruby. In the meantime, you have Juggernaut headed to Xavier's mansion for a second time to total things. He hates Charles. I think he blames Charles for everything that has gone wrong with him in his life. I think Juggernaut is a very insecure individual. But, you find out in the episode that his dad is a jerk. His dad was, I would say, emotionally abusive, verbally abusive to him. And when you have that going on as a kid, and no, there's no excuse for what Kane is doing by any means, but you do find out why he is the way that he is, because if you're not raised correctly, if you're not raised, if you're not taught how to behave, if you're not taught how to treat other people with respect, if your parent treats you with disrespect, and you're just, I think you have a choice as to, to stay that way or to try to do better. But, Kane is, he's blaming Charles for everything. And so I like the beginning of the episode because you get a lot of action. Juggernaut steals somebody's cab. And yet again here, he's reminding us all that he's not a mutant because somebody mistakenly calls him a mutant. Beast and Xavier are the only two at the mansion, I believe. Xavier's trying to contact the other X-Men, and he can't seem to get anybody. It sounds like Gambit is messing with his his kinetic abilities. I'm not sure what he's doing. He sounds like he's fixing something. I don't know if he's working on a car. You do hear his theme, but he has no speaking role in the episode. I'm not sure what's going on with him. Of course, we get to see Rogue and Storm show up at the mansion later on, but it's just Beast and Charles trying to fend off the Juggernaut. And Eugene, he reads he reads from the tablet, and I think the glass ceiling. I'm sure there's more than one glass ceiling in the mansion. It falls on Kane, and just as it does that, Juggernaut's powers leave him because Eugene has read the tablet there, and then he acquires Juggernaut's powers, and now you have Kane fighting for his life because, well, the ceiling fell on him, and I would imagine he probably shrank a little bit. I would think that the Juggernaut is a much bigger individual. Kane is quite a lot bigger when he's all juiced up by the powers of Cedric. And now, well, I would imagine he's just an old guy. I'm not really sure. I always wanted a Kane action figure, just plain Kane. Although he'd probably be a grumpy old man, not much to him. But I was like, yeah, that would have been cool if we could have gotten a Kane Marco action figure. Well, I mean, he probably wouldn't be old if we got him. He'd probably be Kane in his younger years when he found the ruby, which would have been cool. So you've got Wolverine and Cyclops, and they are sent to track down the ruby. They're sent to wrest it back from Eugene, and none of the X-Men want to save Kane because he has made their lives a nightmare for quite a while now. Charles has had to put up with this guy, his belittling, his bullying since he was a kid, and he tells him, you need to understand, I don't want to do this either. His very existence tears at me, but he is my brother. And note that he doesn't call Kane his stepbrother. I love that about Charles. There's no step about it. He considers Kane family, even though Kane has just been awful to him. Because I think that's the type of person Charles is. He wants to see Kane be better. He wants to see Kane make the right choices because he believes that there is a good person in there somewhere. He has to go into Kane's mind quite a bit in this episode, and that's probably my favorite part of the episode because we find out that this guy marries Xavier's mom. She's a widow, and he marries her for her wealth. Charles didn't know this. It was unbeknownst to Charles. I think up until he probes Kane's mind, I think he believed that his stepfather cared for him. But then he finds out just how awful this man was to Kane when Kane was a boy. And you get to see instances in which Kane is just picking at Charles. I don't know if he knocks him off of his horse or Charles falls off. I would imagine Kane might shove him. I don't know. It sounds like something Kane would do. I would imagine Charles was around 11, 12 years old in that flashback, and Kane was probably 15, 16. And one thing that Kane tells him is like, I'm your stepbrother. I'm not your brother. I'm your stepbrother. I'm going to step on you every chance I get. And, Charles is like, but why? I didn't do anything to you. So you have him sent to boarding school. And there's that one scene where Charles finds out that Kane's dad, that his stepfather, Charles' stepfather, was a jerk. He was just marrying, I think her name is Sharon in this continuity. He was marrying Charles' mom for her wealth. He didn't care about her at all. And I love these moments like this when we get them, because Charles is always so he's calm, he's collected, he projects this aura of peace and well-being about him, but in this case he's shaken to his core because he's like, well, my stepfather never cared about me or my mother. He just wanted her money. And at one point he's talking to Beast about how awful Cain's father was to Cain, and Beast says the sins of the father. And of course that's a very old axiomatic quote. You know, if your father, if your parent treats you awful, it's going to stick with you. And you know, Cain, he he's a very insecure person, and you know this is why he has been so awful to Charles over the years. And even when Charles is in Cain's mind, even when he's telling him, "Look, we're gonna find the ruby. We're gonna save your life," and Cain is like, "Well, what's in it for you?" And Charles says, "Well, the satisfaction that I've saved your life." And I love the exchange between these two. You have Cain saying, "Well, don't you get it? I don't care. I don't care," and that can mean so many things. But I feel like Cain's telling him, "I don't care about you. I don't care about your team. I don't care that you care about me." He says, "I'm still gonna make your life a living nightmare," and Charles says, "Well, that's my burden to bear." And you've got Wolverine and Cyclops tracking down Eugene, and it's a bit of comic relief because I think the rest of the episode is very heavy for a kid show. Not that I really consider X-Men to be a kid show. I never really have. It's certainly very heavy for a Saturday morning cartoon, but I love the comic relief. There's a helicopter going over. So while Scott and Logan, right before they leave to nab that ruby, Scott's like, "We're going to save the Juggernaut's sorry life, and don't bother telling me you don't like it." And Logan, being very mature, he's like, "I don't like it." And it's like, "Oh, that's great, man. Just throw it back in his face." It was one of my favorite moments. Wolverine is just so obdurate here. And it always made me laugh when I was a kid. I was like, man, he acts like he's 10 sometimes. But with Eugene, he doesn't know his own strength. And I don't know if he goes back home, back to his apartment, but he's apparently wrecking everything because he's gotten so big. And he still sounds like Eugene, though. He doesn't have this booming, loud voice. It must be hilarious looking at this massive, mass of muscles, and he's just kind of wrecking wherever he is. I think I would imagine he's in his apartment. He wrecks stuff, then he goes to some club. They find him. He doesn't want to give back the ruby, but they eventually get it back from him. And there's a moment toward the end of the episode where Xavier, he's had enough because he's still trying to reason with Cain. He's trying to figure out why he's done all this, why he is the way that he is. He wants Cain to do a 180. He wants Cain to be a better man, I think. But Cain just laughs at him, and there's this moment where Cain comes home from boarding school, and he finds out that Charles can read minds, and Charles is begging him not to tell anybody, but Cain, being Cain, he just starts screaming "Muty, muty, muty" over and over and over again. And he's laughing while they're communing in the I don't think it's the astral plane. I think it's their shared mind or whatever at this point. And Cain tells him, "I made sure everyone hated you, even Sandra." And to this day, I'm like, well, I guess that must have been someone who Charles probably had a thing for. Maybe we see her in a flashback with no speaking roles in this episode. Maybe maybe we get that. I always got the sense that Cain did some kind of horrible smear campaign against Charles, because kids do that. If there is a kid that is, they have it rough, chances are they're going to take what they're feeling and try to make you feel 10 times worse than they do. If you've ever been through something like that way back as a kid, it's pretty crappy. And I think Charles had to go through this too, and he comes out of that meeting of the minds there, and he's like, I think my brother is a bully. Cain is he belittles, he bullies. Don't ask me to forgive him. He's talking to Storm, and she's like, I wouldn't, but you've taught us not to let our pasts control our hearts. And, then he kind of comes back to himself, and he does the right thing. Even though Cain says he's not going to change, nothing is going to be any different. He's still... he still manages to be the bigger man. He gives his brother the ruby. Cain says his little recitation. Eugene loses his powers. I think he gets himself a girlfriend at the end of the episode. I don't know that for sure, but maybe things are going to look up for Mr. Wiederspan. And I think my favorite part is when Cain, he leaves. He doesn't continue his attack. He just leaves. And he tells everybody, well, I'm not in the mood. I'm out of here some other time. And Scott is wondering, well, should we follow him, Professor? And Xavier says, no, he's leaving. I believe this is his way of saying thank you. And I'm like, wow, ever the optimist, Charles. But I like that about Charles. In spite of learning truths that have shaken this guy to his core, he still wants his brother to eventually do a 180. Comic spoilers ahead. I've been, reading up on Juggernaut over the past, couple of years, and he actually does become a better person. I think for a time, maybe permanently. So that's kind of cool. I was not surprised when I read that. I don't know if it took. It's been a while since I did read that about Cain in the comics. I also found out very recently that this guy's a big Dazzler fan. And that really cracked me up because it's kind of... Well, I mean, I think it's hilariously adorable. They actually fight in the comics, and then Cain offers to pay her for the damages. I think he's kind of starstruck, so that must have been hilarious. And then there was this instance where I think he had a one-night stand with She-Hulk when she was his lawyer for a time. I'm like, Jen, that's fine, but wow, okay. Things I never really realized about the Juggernaut until very, very, very recently. I really hope we get to see him in X-Men 97. No Juggernaut in season 1. It's been a couple months since that show finished airing in terms of season 1. We're going to get at least 2 more. I hope to see Cain show back up because this is his last appearance, barring, non-speaking cameos I don't know about in the original animated series. He's big, he's loud to some, but when you give me an episode like this in which... you see that this guy has layers. I love stuff like this. So hopefully we're not done with Juggy. I hope he shows up in, future seasons of X-Men 97. I wonder what he's been up to. I would have loved to have seen his reaction after we were all made to believe Charles had passed away. Well, I mean, the characters in the show. I mean, we as viewers knew he was probably going to be fine when the original series wrapped up. I would imagine Juggernaut didn't have a weep fest or anything. I wonder if he kind of chuckled to himself, but then maybe he got sad. I don't know. Just an interesting, compelling character, I think. He's got a lot of layers to him, and I hope we're not done with him. I give this episode a 10 out of 10. And next time we're going to be talking about Deal with the Devil. That's featuring Omega Red, another one of my favorite characters. And until then...